And that relates also to progressive stages of growth and development that most people find it hypocritical, not just contradictory, but downright hypocritical to hold both and tell both. And yet, whenever you see certain people do it well, you're like, wow, they have got good perspective on things. And so when you see it done well, it makes sense. It's just that for many of us, it's hard. It's just hard.
He is a certified scrum trainer, enterprise agile coach, agile transformation leader, and an author. He's someone I look up to with high regards and a friend. Today we are having conversation on a very interesting topic, and that being the untapped agility. Yes, we are discussing untapped agility with a dear friend of mine, Jesse. So, join my conversation with him as we explore different areas of the transformation, starting with untapped agility all the way to the leadership challenges. Let's join in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading your book, and
He's reading my book.
I wanted to start with one of the quote, and I came across this quote at multiple places, I would say. So you are saying that your transformation is not a failure. It turns out the buy-in, the talent, the alignment, and the growth you need to break through are already in front of you. It is simply hidden under the surface, undiscovered, unutilized, and untapped. So what do you mean by that untapped agility?
Nimesh, thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation and to the podcast. Yes, your transformation is much more than you think it is, and that really is the key point. Is potential and opportunity. And I see so many transformation leaders just frustrated that they're at all levels of the organization, everyone from individual team leads all the way up to senior executives who are just so frustrated that their transformation, their vision of the future state is not happening either as fast as they wanted or in the shape that they wanted. And so many times we're left to look for root causes of, they're just not on board, or, they just don't get it. I just don't have the right people around me. I don't have the right leadership around me, or the culture is in the way. And the truth is, everything you're talking about right there is part of the job. All of the root causes you just cited for not having the transformation is the work of transformation. And if we just take a different step, if we just do a little bit of a lateral juke or a pivot, you're going to find a lot more buy-in, productivity, morale. You're going to find it all there if we just are willing to do what I call a rebound move into a different approach. So that's essentially the essence of the story.
So if I'm an organization, how do I identify this untapped agility? How do we, again, you are saying undiscovered, unutilized, and untapped, right?
Yeah.
So as an organization, as a senior leader, how do I ensure that I discover those talents, and how do I make sure that we are utilizing those talents?
The title of the book, Untapped Agility, 7 leadership moves to take your transformation to the next level. And so there are 7 examples of a recurring pattern. So for example, one of the challenges that you might find is that just not enough there's not enough impact that with the transformation efforts we've been doing. Because, I started off with a boost, and the boost that I started off with, I leveraged my role in my organization to drive agile processes, practices, approaches. But we ran into a barrier, which is that they're not on board over in that department, and they're not on board in that function and that support area. And they're just not on board, and we're not seeing the impact that I wish we had. And so the boost was that you took initiative and you got moving forward. The barrier is you in your own influence can only go so far on your own. So the rebound move is to give the transformation away. And so what that means is I'm leaning against the logic of the boost, take initiative, work within my department. That got me the progress I've had because I've gotten to the limits of what that initial boost will get me. Another one is we're always behind. We're always behind. We're not getting far enough on the transformation. We're not getting far enough on our initiatives. Well, we're always, and that's the barrier you had because the boost you took was to take advantage of opportunities. You seized all this opportunity. Look at this new shiny object initiative over here. Ooh, let's go have, let's do some agile training over here and get them on board. And then before you know it, everybody's interested in everything and there's not enough of you to go around. And so you're feeling behind and they're not doing. And so the rebound against that energy is to start saying no to new ideas, new feature requests, new transformation requests. I appreciate you want to go agile. I can't be there to support you. Here's some self-service resources. I'll get to you next quarter. And that leans against the energy of you seizing all the opportunities that come in front of you. And so the pattern is that an initial logical boost gets you momentum, but inevitably the initial strategy you chose runs into a barrier. And that barrier is common pain points around transformation. I'm not getting enough buy-in. I'm not getting enough impact. I'm not getting enough done quickly enough. I'm not being viewed as credible with my messaging. I'm seeing snapback in the culture. All of these common barriers that people run into, it turns out that the answer to each one of them is the rebound, which is to lean against the logic that got you there in the first place. And it's this graphic here that tells the story.
Yeah, great. So even before we go into a little bit deeper dive on this untapped agility, can we talk very quickly about the transformation itself? Now, what is a transformation for an organization? Now, you and I both have worked with many companies and many executives, and they all have different definition of this transformation. So, if you can just briefly describe what do we mean when we say transformation, specifically agile transformation? Let's talk about it, because nowadays there are digital transformations happening.
Well, yeah. So there's digital transformations that are super popular. There's a product transformation that is coming in vogue as we move from projects to products. There are many times the conversation around a cloud transformation is another one that was ubiquitous. And then culture transformations and so transformational leadership is now becoming a key expectation, especially in senior leadership levels, but also across the full hierarchy of any organization. And really what it means is a fundamental reconfiguring, re-envisioning of how the organization behaves and what it achieves and not necessarily what it's about in its mission, but who we are as the people serving this mission. And many times it tends to fall into either one of two camps. Either a transformation tends to be focusing much on the structural parts of work, the mechanical parts of work. And so we might call that We might call that the left brain side of the equation. And so you see a lot of like, okay, we're going to roll out people, processes, and tools. We're going to roll out role definitions, and we're going to roll out training and new practices and policies. And so, projects to products, and that's all about changing funding models. And agile transformation then is about installing sprints and points and backlogs, and that's what agile transformation means, so that we can achieve greater things. The other side of it. The other no, that's not what it is. It's about culture. It's about mindset. It's not about the mechanics. It's about mindset. It's not about structure. It's about culture. It's about values and behaviors. And we're going to do a lot of conversation, and we're going to be talking about our virtues and our DNA. And we're going to talk, but we never get around to actually doing anything. And the people that are over here on the left brain who are doing a lot of things never really actually talk about why are we doing this? Where are we going? Who do we want to be? And so one of the moves that we talk about is you're finding a lot of snapback into old behaviors. That's the barrier that you're dealing with because you were philosophically consistent. You went all in on people, processes, and tools, or you went all in on culture and values and mindset. We need to change mindset or any of that. That's not going to stick. Or we need to go and change processes and tools because unless we're doing anything, we're not doing anything. And the truth is, you got to have both sides of this conversation, the yin and yang of change. The yin and yang of change is about addressing the tangible and the intangible at the same time. And so when you hear this talk of transformation, whether it's digital or product or agile, whatever, 9 times out of 10, a leader from team lead trying to transform their team or an executive transforming their organization, it falls into these two extremes, and you really need to blend both of them in order to get the results you're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you. So you mentioned, I'm going to pick on one of the word that you mentioned. You mentioned snapback, and that's one of the barriers for the executives, right? They kind of go back to the old ways of doing things. What are the other reasons why these transformations could fail?
I have a graphic for you. This graphic is probably familiar to a lot of people. It's the change curve, right? And so the team journey, if you're trying to transform our team to be more agile and lean and collaborative, well, we've heard of forming, storming, norming, and performing as different stages of team maturity. This happens to be the curve for any kind of change. It's called the J curve. And it shows up in economics. You got to spend money before you make money. It shows up in psychotherapy with Virginia Satir and her work, and it shows up here with Bruce Tuckman's work on team forming. It's also the pattern of transformation. And the pattern for transformation is that we're going to come in here and we're going to come up with some ideas. We're going to have some training. We're going to have some workshops, and immediately people freak out. And so that's usually that initial spike of enthusiasm, that initial spike of interest, it's going to run into the barriers. And I think the reason why we see so much snapback is because there isn't the institutional will or institutional patience or the personal patience to get through the valley of despair, which is a necessary part of the journey. All growth requires pain. That's why they're called growing pains. So I would say that's another key root cause, is that when we go on the journey, we're not prepared for some of the roadblocks, some of the roller coaster ride. I mean, I'm sure you've been punched in the face a number of times trying to lead change, and it's not an easy task.
Yeah. And there's oftentimes these executives take this up thinking, hey, we will just pour in this money and bring in all these consultants, and within 6 months, year will be agile, right? So they are kind of underestimating that effort also, right? What else can these leaders do to avoid these pitfalls, avoid these tripwires that can fail the transformation?
Well, let me first address that. When a leader has a vision for evolving an organization, modernizing it, improving it, you mentioned that 6 months we're going to be totally productized, totally digitized, totally agilized. 6 months. What's interesting is that the Business Agility Institute recently came out with a study that said the average journey is 2 years before you see bottom line results. And by bottom line, we're talking about financial measures, lagging indicators. Sure, you can start seeing some immediate benefits with some collaboration and some positive anecdotes and stories, but I thought that was an interesting metric that came out of the study. That's like, for you to start seeing financial ROI on an agile journey, it's going to take you a couple of years. If the question is, well, then how can I accelerate that a little bit? How can we become the exception to the rule and be a little bit above average? And that's really what the leader's impact is about. Is that if this is the transformation, not just for a team, but for an organization or for a department or for a product line, well, then our aspiration as leaders is to shorten the amount of time we spend in the valley of despair, and then to lessen the pain of the valley of despair. And so for some of that, it might be just simply being aware of the bias of the boost. And so when we take those initial first steps, be aware that there's a bias to it. So one of them is, one of the barriers that a lot of Agile coaches run into is they're not doing it right. They're doing it wrong. They're estimating in hours. Their sprints are 6 weeks long. Their scrum masters are bossy. They're just doing it wrong. And to which I have to tell them, well, you mean like the way you were when you first started? That you have to, by definition, you have to be bad at something before you're good at something. And so the boost of leveraging industry best practices, if I'm aware that there's going to become a limitation to how much a copy pasting somebody else's practice is going to give me in my place, my situation, if I'm aware of that in advance, then I might be more sensitive to when I've hit the pain point of trying to force fit somebody else's process into my environment. It was good to get started. You have to do it that way. But if I'm a little bit more aware that each of the moves that I make has an implicit barrier coming to it, then I'll be more sensitive to when that pain starts showing up and I can make my pivot sooner. I find that a lot of times transformation leaders, they're still way out here deep in the valley of despair because they're just refusing to pivot. No, it has to be this way. And so it becomes a real moment of test to say, what is the vision that is firm and what is the strategy that is flexible? And that is, I think that's an inflection point that every person has to go in through at some point is what's my true north, my non-negotiable, and then what are all the negotiable details that I'm clinging onto that I really don't need to? That would be how I would advise lessening the dip, lessening the degree and the duration of the dip.
Awesome. I'm also going to go back to, and picking on another word that you mentioned. And one of the things that I read and was intrigued about, you mentioned the rebound earlier. So can you talk a little bit about the rebound? And the second thing you mentioned in your book is the storytelling. So what do you mean by storytelling, and how does that help in this?
One of the challenges is that as you're driving a transformation, you're actually scoring some quick wins, you're starting to see some positive results, but nobody else does. And you're starting to get some unfair criticism and some unfair perceptions around that. And so what that means is that what you see as success, not everybody else sees as success. And so you start off in the beginning by getting the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, and you upset some people. You start muscling in on their status quo. You start making them a little bit nervous. And so people may not realize that they're being overtly resistant, but you're triggering them to get into, in many cases, a subconscious resistance. They may not be able to name why it is that they're resisting your transformation, and they just start criticizing you. This is never going to work. This is just like that other thing you tried last year and it didn't work out. You know what? The previous executive tried to do this, or the previous project manager tried to do this, and it failed miserably. And it's just going to. I had one person tell me in front of this was a group meeting, a group workshop. I knew you IT people weren't to be trusted. I knew that you were selling us a bill of goods on day one, and if you think that you're going to get. It was like legit confrontation in front of 20 other people. And I had to back off a little bit. And so the rebound is that instead of focusing on just getting done, the work done, the rebound is to start focusing on owning the narrative. And so the rebound is leaning against the energy of the boost. The boost, in this case, is making progress. Is making progress on it. Instead, we want to stop making progress and start talking about the transformation in a way that helps people. So there's a couple of things that we mentioned in the book about some tips, like yes and is a way to is a principle from improv. That we kind of explore, and it's interesting because it's also related to the Stockdale principle from Jim Collins' Good to Great, that strong leadership is one that acknowledges the challenges of the reality but has a positive view on possibility in the future. And then we also talk about the framing narrative itself, where we tell a picture of the future, we acknowledge the current state, and then we offer steps to get to the future despite our current state. So there's some concrete techniques you can do to own the narrative, but the rebound is to lean against that initial energy that got you to where you are.
Great, awesome. So another quote I'm going to bring up from the book.
Man, you're making me self-conscious because like he actually listens to what I say.
The transformation is obviously a big topic nowadays. Another thing that you mentioned is this leaders, and in fact, I was talking to Bob Galen a couple of weeks back, a month back, and he also mentioned this. You mentioned that for these leaders, right? There's a need for these leaders or even the agile coaches to focus on their personal development, right? As the leaders, the personal leadership capability development. Bob Galen mentioned something like, hey, we agile coaches also need agile coaches, right? Yeah. You need somebody who can put a mirror in front of you, right? So how
physician heal thyself.
If you can go a little bit into that aspect as to how can we make sure that we are investing in that personal development, especially if I'm a leader executive, I may think, hey, I'm at the top of the food chain, I don't need to do anything, right? Or agile coach, hey, again, I'm agile coach, I don't need to do anything, I know everything about agile.
Oh. Um, and so there's a great quote from a book by the creators of the Leadership Circle, and there's a fascinating graphic in there that I don't have at the tip of my hands, but essentially, the level of complexity that we're dealing with in today's world is off the charts. I mean, when we talk about pace of change, we talk about globalization, we talk about new expectations around social societies, whether it's things like gender, race. Like the kind of complexity we're dealing with today is nothing we've seen in the history of humanity. And yet, we all start off as children with a blank slate. And so we have to grow through childhood, adolescence, and we get into adulthood. And what we're finding more and more today is that the level, the complexity of my heart and mind does not match the complexity of my reality and my environment. And so we're finding ways to many times to simplify the problems that we're trying to solve and simplify them so that they can make sense. But the way that we simplify it tends to hide the nuances, the challenges. And so a lot of times we're trying to apply a cookie cutter solution to a very complicated problem. And so I'll give you an example, which is let's say I'm working with multiple teams on a large initiative, and one team really likes to be given specific details and direction. Another team likes complete autonomy to define and another team likes somewhere in between. And they're looking at you as the leader, and your style is very specific and very directive and very prescriptive. Only one of those teams is going to like you. Only one of those teams is going to be served well by your style. And then I hear a lot of team leads, coaches, supervisors, they all say, well, my style is my style, and if they can't handle it, that's on them. To which I have to say, well, then you're a one-dimensional leader. And so the challenge that we're facing in transformational leadership, whether you're a coach, a team lead, a supervisor, an executive, is that you have just committed to the most complex undertaking that is possible. Organizations are collections of people, and collections of people, communities, societies, they're the most complex things that we see and deal with, complex adaptive systems. And you're going to change that? That's even more complicated. First, you have to understand it. Now you're going to change it and understand it as it's changing. And so by definition, you've just raised the stakes. And so we need to raise our own capacities to match our complexities that are around us. And so that's what leadership development is about. It's about closing the gap of complexity. The complexity of my heart and mind needs to match the complexity of the problems that we're trying to solve. And that means being able to change my style to fit the people that I'm at. It means being able to admit my mistakes. It means being able to be both assertive at times, but then accommodative at times. And all of that is just hard. Depending on which research you look at it, it's only, in some cases, 10% of the population, but at best, only 25% of leaders are able to do that. And you might think that you're in the top 25% of all leaders in all levels and all industries, or even in your own team, you may not be there yet. So it turns out one of the chapters in here is to look in the mirror, because if the transformation isn't going the way that you want it to, it might be time to look in the mirror and ask, am I myself transforming the way they need me to?
Why not just blame the consultants?
Well, that is a value add role that I play. I do play the expendable consultant who speaks things that would otherwise be unspeakable.
Yeah. Yeah. You also mentioned that these leaders should be able to look at things, not just from the passive, and I'm still in your words, not just the pessimistic lenses, but pivot it and be more like look at it from the optimistic lens, and use your storytelling again to give that optimistic outlook. So if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, what I was referencing there was something called the Stockdale paradox, which again comes from good to great, and it was named after a military veteran, James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, and he explained the mindset this way: the mindset of being able to overcome challenges, and as a prisoner of war, you have a lot of challenges. He said, you never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And so it's about having a faith that that we will prevail on a personal level, on an organizational level. But I'm not going to sugarcoat the challenges that we're facing. Sometimes leaders or sometimes professionals will be super frustrated and agitated about the challenges that we're feeling, and we'll just live in the swamp. We'll just live there. And other people will be living over here in the clouds saying, oh no, it's okay. It's okay. It's not a problem, because look at all of this opportunity and this, look at all this potential and the mission, and it's not that big of a deal. And so it becomes really difficult to hold the contradiction that we are simultaneously screwed and also simultaneously on the path to eventually overcoming. And so it's holding the contradiction. And that relates also to progressive stages of growth and development, that most people find it hypocritical, not just contradictory, but downright hypocritical to hold both and tell both. And yet, whenever you see certain people do it well, you're like, wow, they have got good perspective on things. And so when you see it done well, it makes sense. It's just that for many of us, it's hard. It's just hard. And that's why leadership development is so helpful and important, because it's really about building those new muscles that allow us to play both roles, to play the comforter role as well as the challenger role at the same time.
If you were to share 3 things from your book.
Yeah, the first thing I would say, the challenges that you're facing, you're not alone. Not only are they common, but they're statistically measurable. And we have data in there that shows the difficulties that people are running into. Everything from Agile champions feeling as though that the Agile movement and mission has been corrupted and polluted, to executives saying that the Agile promise is elusive and not achievable. And so if you're running into those barriers and those frustrations, you are not alone, and you don't have to be stuck, because plenty of other people, plenty of other organizations have gotten over the mountain. They've gotten over it. And so that leads me to point number 2, which is be prepared to pivot your transformation. If you're willing to pivot your products, well, treat your transformation as a product. Do you have a transformation? Your transformation leader serving as with a product mindset, where I've got customers who are looking for a value proposition. And do you have a change backlog that offers incremental steps along the way? Be prepared to pivot, because the organizations are complex adaptive systems. As soon as you change it, it evolves into a different organization. And now my plan that I used to have no longer is 100% relevant. which leads to point number 3, which is if you're not prepared to pivot, if you find it to be something that sounds like being hypocritical or pivoting sounds like giving up, it might be time to look in the mirror. It might be time to start looking at your own biases and blind spots. And for that, you really want to get an executive coach, somebody that's trained to help you work through your blind spots without giving you canned solutions. And that's the difference between coaching and consulting. Consultants are hired to offer options. Every consultant loves to be asked, so what are my options? Ooh, thank you for asking. I'll charge you $125 for the next 15 minutes to go through all. Coaches, on the other hand, are challenged to, are equipped and trained to challenge you, to explore and to work through the hard work. So number 1, you're not alone. Number 2, be prepared to pivot. Number 3, if you're finding the first 2 super challenging, find yourself an executive coach so that you can look in the mirror. Now, I do just want to say that anytime I get a chance to share these ideas, in case you can't tell, I'm passionate about this. I do this for a living. I've made this my life's work. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, then just head over to the links that are in the description. Find me on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Head over to jessefewell.com and find me there, and just reach out. I love talking to this to anybody who's got thoughts, questions, or needs help getting further down the journey. Untappedagility.com.
There you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed the conversation and got a lot out of this session. Hope you picked on the little gold nuggets that Jesse has been sprinkling across this conversation. If you are in the business of change, if you are in the business of transformation, you cannot afford to ignore these advices. Look for that untapped agility. Look for those challenges and look at them as your opportunities, and apply all these learnings from these sessions to your specific team, to your specific organization, to your specific transformation needs.